Welcome to Pod Strangely Warmed. I'm Daniel Hawkins, your host, and today we continue in a series of conversations looking at this time of year that we find ourselves in, this start of school time, and asking ourselves, how can we be invested in the lives of those who are beginning their school journey? And no, teachers, I'm sorry, we're not necessarily talking about you. Today we continue to look at the life of student ministry and how do we understand more fully where we are, how things have shifted under us over the last couple years, and where things might be going. To join us in this conversation today, we welcome Loni Fancher from First Arlington and Chelsea Peddecord from Highland Park United Methodist Church. We have a joy of the North Texas, Central Texas combo conversation here. And this is a conversation that is so incredibly worth having some of the best voices in the room. And so I'm incredibly thankful for both of you for joining us in this as we kind of understand more fully and clearly where we're at, where things have been, and maybe a little window into where things are going. And so,
thanks for having us.
Absolutely, thank you, folks who've been with us. Know you, Loni. You were joined us last week. We look remarkably the same this week as we did last week. It's fantastic. But Chelsea, you are new to our audience here at Pod Strangely Warmed. If you could give us a few minutes of introduction as to who you are and what your primary responsibilities are there at Highland Park.
Absolutely. So as you said, my name is Chelsea Peddecord. I'm an ordained deacon in the North Texas Conference, and then I serve as the pastor to youth and their families at Highland Park UMC, the lovely, beautiful church on SMU's campus. So what that actually means is I have the privilege and the honor of getting to shepherd our students 7th through 12th, as well as our youth staff here at HPUMC.
Very good. Very good. What is the thing about student ministry that people have the biggest misunderstanding about?
Oh, there's so many. I would say the main one is that student ministry is like ministry light or ministry junior or JV, without realizing students, especially Gen Z, I would say, are just such a gift because they're willing to ask questions that I think adults get scared of, and they're willing to talk back to a pastor in a way that adults only mumble as they exit a sermon.
Okay, that's fantastic. Well, and you weren't here with us on the last week's episode, but I confessed that I deeply believe incredibly gifted student ministry folks are genetic anomalies, right? It takes a gift set that is better and different and harder.
Well, and so long the church has used it as like the training wheel spot, right? And like we have just set people up to fail in that place because
been a bad youth director twice in my life. Thankfully, they moved me up.
It's just like anything
down,
else, it's a calling.
Yeah. Loni, what would you say is the greatest misconception about student ministry?
Oh gosh, that it's just a phase of life. Like student ministry is when kids are going from being concrete thinkers to abstract thinkers. It's when they're going from being a child to being an adult. And so all of your faith formation that's going to stick may be happening in those teenage years. And so like helping them figure that out as opposed to just treating it like a silo where we do programming and, play a lot of dodgeball. But helping them figure out how to plug into the church and plug into their faith and plug into their communities is vital for the longevity of the church.
I love that you name with clarity that shift in mindset that our young people are going through, right?
Absolutely.
They're moving from a very concrete space to a much more abstract space, right? And they're moving into a season of life where possibilities are opening up. We had this conversation with some of our campus ministry folks a couple of weeks ago, right? Where they said they have, by the time they reach college, they've entered this place where everything is open, right? Relationships are radically different. Education is radically, they're exposed to so much more, right? And I think jokingly, that's why I say everybody goes through a Baptist phase in college, right? Because it's I'm going to retreat to concrete because everything else feels scary and uncertain.
That's so true.
It's so accurate.
But I wonder how much people like you two are helping young people maybe avoid that, right? Because they've become comfortable and formed in the abstract as it is naturally occurring within them, right? Chelsea, as you engage in young people's ministry, right? A 6th grader is radically different than a 12th grader, right? How does that differential shape and form the ministry that you guys cultivate and craft for young people? And let's just start there.
I think really youth ministry, if you can begin to understand brain development, you're already going to be a much stronger youth pastor. Understanding, especially like that prefrontal cortex, it's not done
It's
yet.
not done.
We're in no, it is half baked at this point.
At best.
And right now, too, we're recruiting volunteers. And one of our small group boundaries is don't expect emotional support from students. And, that seems obvious, but one of my favorite things to tell leaders is, hey, as a quick prayer request, if you just want to say, hey, y'all, I have a big thing coming at work, that's fine. That's appropriate. But they're not going to follow up with you, y'all. Their brain is not ready to think outside just yet. And if they ever do, it's a happy surprise. And so it's like understanding that brain development in your sermons, in your games, in the questions you ask. I always joke, especially as we say people don't fully understand youth ministry, is a lot of people, most people can figure out how to preach to an adult congregation on a Sunday morning. Maybe 1 in 10 can preach to the youth on a Sunday or Wednesday night because you have to know the brain development.
Oh, yeah. Preaching during the pandemic when we were preaching on Sunday mornings to cameras as opposed to congregations, that was the hardest thing for me because Sunday nights are super interactive. Like I write my sermons knowing that whether I have asked a question or not, someone is going to yell something ridiculous or maybe profound.
Absolutely.
And so that's just how my structure is. And so to not even have a congregation at all and be preaching to a camera, I was like, I haven't done this in like 20 years of just, preaching from a script. It was a weird place to be.
Well, and that season in particular was so radically disorienting for everybody.
Oh, for sure.
Right? Student ministry, kids ministry, adult ministry, everybody, right? I insisted that our staff come to the church and we did worship live even when nobody else was in the building because I needed to know as I looked into that camera that somebody was with me in that moment, right? Even if, I would never see them because I too am a very interactive, this is a call and response kind of thing. There is no script, right? I know I'm starting here and going here and going here. I got the pathway, but it's going to ebb and flow with whoever's in the room and how the conversation is going and that kind of thing. In that radical disorientation of COVID, right? You've named already how that impacted some of the preaching things. What did that radical disorientation, how did that show up in other ways of your ministry existence? And like building on that, how is student ministry today different than it was even as recent ago as like 2019, the first quarter of 2020?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
Loni, I don't know about you. I think in my context, and I served in a very, very privileged area that had a church that already had the cameras ready to go and had an online presence and a social media presence when COVID hit. For us, I think what was fascinating was it was adult congregants and up who seemed to love the online experience of church.
Yes.
And people seemed to assume youth would love that, but they hated it. And I think so much of that was because so much of their life was already online. They weren't looking to watch sermons online and get on Instagram live with you. They wanted in person. And so the work we had to do to be outdoors, again, it came from a place of great privilege of I already owned the equipment to set up speakers outdoors and all of these different layers. It was such difficult ministry having to set up, tear down, when I would have friends who got to do the Zoom stuff or the live stuff, which was also equally hard. It's just different.
It was just different. Yeah. We had a giant shift in youth ministry. I started actually at the church at First Arlington, December of 2019.
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
I had been there.
Good luck.
Right. I had been there for about 2.5 months and then the world drastically different. And we had a giant shift in our youth ministry since I had gotten there. So we had already gone from like 20 kids on a normal Sunday to about 45 kids on a normal Sunday. And then the world shut down. And so when that looked like it was still going to be happening, as school started in the fall, I went to my pastor and said, I can't do online youth group. I cannot. Yeah. Like if kids are going to have to be online for school for 8 hours a day, they will not log in for youth group, which is fair. Right? Like even those of us who were doing adulthood stuff, we weren't on Zoom for 8 hours a day. For the most part, we were off and on and logging in for meetings and doing our own thing, but they were literally online for all day long. And so we painted squares in the parking lot. And I loaded up, I had 2 giant carts that lived in my office the entire pandemic. One was loaded with the sound equipment and band stuff and all of that. And the other was loaded with small group materials and whatever games we were playing that week. And we did full youth group outside in our parking lot so that kids could find a way to connect and still be engaged in the church, because that's what needed to be done. Our kind of whole ethos, or my whole ethos for the pandemic phase and then now, was, lament the normal and then just embrace the weird.
Okay.
Lament the normal, like, oh, I hate that, I celebrated when I got to take apart those 2 carts after 8 months of doing stuff in the parking lot, right? Like the fact that those 2 carts no longer live in my office and I can actually walk into my office and not have to navigate that was extraordinary. But I also now, 3 years later, kind of miss that time a little bit. Like there was something really great that was happening.
It was very intimate.
Yeah. We had 60 kids in a parking lot and it was still super intimate. And ministering in our community, our intentional community, our immediate community around our church has a different opinion of our church because we did outdoor worship and they got to hear, our actual neighbors got to hear worship happening and sermons happening through that entire year. It was a whole different vibe than what they're used to coming out of that building.
Loni, you said that you lament the normal and celebrate the weird, and that has kind of stuck with you.
Absolutely.
In what ways is that vibe sticking with you today? As I'm assuming you're back in the building.
We are. We have since Easter of 2021.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think we've talked about as sociologists have talked about is that the pandemic accelerated wherever we are to wherever you were going to be in 2025. So if you were in decline, it rapidly accelerated your decline. And if you were in a space of growth, it rapidly accelerated your growth. And that's hard because we normally have those experiences gradually, right? And you get used to being the frog boiling in the pot.
Sure, yeah.
And so it became a challenge in figuring out, all right, like what things needed to die, like what things during that we were doing before didn't survive the pandemic, and that's okay. Like what are the things we don't have to do anymore? And so all of
golden calves,
right? All of the things that may have been golden calves before, we survived without 12 to 18 months without them. Do they have to come back?
Yeah.
Were they healthy before? And if they weren't healthy before, but we really loved them, then how can we make them healthy as we reintroduce them? So that's, I think, been the challenge of ministry post-pandemic, is figuring out what was okay to let go of. Like, we're all so busy.
Yeah.
Do we have to be busy? Do we have to be super programmed? Do we have to, was that a need that people are having? Or is that just how we thought we had to do ministry because it's how we've done ministry since 1975?
Yeah.
I don't know that that's something that our churches all needed. And so figuring out, like, what does your congregation need? What does your context need? And meeting those needs versus this is the way we've always done it is a challenge of ministry.
That was some of the extreme things, Loni, we saw a lot in women in youth ministry.
For sure.
Everyone was commenting, it's time to break the model. It's time to do this differently. And you would just see this on and on and on of everyone wanting to shake up the model of youth ministry. And I don't know how many people actually did it, but it's what everyone said they wanted to do. Right. When I feel like, for me, at least in my context, the key was really just handing the reins to students.
Yes.
And letting them run. And all right, we're outdoors. What's the sermon series? Okay. Or all right, we're finally back indoors, but you have to wear masks. How do y'all want to promote this? Is it a TikTok? How are people going to fight about it? Like, it really became, for my context, this might be unique. I felt like parents stepped back even more.
100%.
Which allowed our ministry to be even more student-led rather than, quite honestly, parents with preferences about certain things and how they were done. It became, okay, no, this is what the students want. And I think every ministry, obviously we're talking in generalizations, every youth ministry that is bigger since 2019, I think that's what they did. Was, honestly, I was so exhausted in my leadership. I was very happy
so tired
to hand the reins to kids at that point.
Well, and to let them be, you and I and talk about all the time about letting kids be the church, right? Like we've confirmed them in 6th or 8th grade. And from that point on, they're members in full connection, just like the rest of us. And they have as much say and as much voice if we let them and empower them. And so that's one of the things the pandemic did, was give us the space to equip and empower, because they were ready to take those reins. Yeah. And so letting them lead out in new and different ways. When the congregations all started to come back, the kids didn't let that go. Yeah. They were used to having it, and they haven't let it go. And so I think that's been an interesting dynamic shift in the churches, and how are kids leading in ways they weren't leading before.
Well, when we think about it, 12 to 18 months of literal you can't be in the building kind of disruption, right? Probably 2.5 years of general disruption, right? In the life of the standard church that's been around for 150 years, for some of our folks, those 2.5 years, that 12 months to 2.5 years is like a drop in the bucket.
Right.
In student ministry, where the life cycle changes so readily, like we had high school kids at the church I serve who hadn't been on mission trip until this summer.
Yes.
Right? Because they missed it the first year they were eligible, and then radical disruption. So we're like fundraising for mission trip, and we're selling this idea and inviting people into this experience. And we realized that, outside of a couple, we had a group that was largely no one had been.
Right.
And I'm like, you're in 9th grade. How do we get here? Right.
Yeah.
But because of the life cycle change and that kind of thing. And so there might be some freedom in that, in terms of the golden calves. It may be your seniors in high school that are holding on to whatever the golden calves were, or their parents with preferences who are holding on to the golden calves. Student leadership, right? Student true leadership, not token leadership.
Right.
Is one of the key things that you are
massive.
seeing right now. What other things have shifted in student membership, student ministry since you started? I mean, not just back to 19, but what's different today than in 2010 or 2015?
So I've been doing youth ministry in some capacity since I was in college. So that's like 20-ish years ago. And in like the early 2000s, youth ministry was very programs based. In the 90s and early 2000s, it was very programming based.
Who can put on the biggest party?
Who can put on the biggest party?
The door prize.
What events are you throwing? What are your door prizes that you're giving away?
Bring a friend for an iPad.
Yeah. Make some sort of giant graphic and hang it on a poster outside your building, and children will flock to come be a part of whatever it is that you have going on. And that is no longer a reality at all. And it's not a bad loss. It's just a shift. And so what happens, I think, in our churches a lot is we'll have people who did youth ministry. Maybe they were adult volunteers. Maybe they were in youth group in that phase. And they'll come with well-intentioned hearts and say, well, you should just do this thing again. It was so great when we did it. And you're like,
bring back lock-ins.
Right? Oh, my word. I have a lock-in on my calendar for the fall. And
no one who's ever worked a lock-in says bring back lock-ins. Let's just make that abundantly clear. If you've been awake at 4 a.m. at a lock-in, you're never saying, I want to do this again.
Yeah. I mean, youth ministry is rife with people who are pro lock-in and anti lock-in. And I am firmly on the fence because I don't like, students love them and it's a lot of work. But I like lockouts. Lockouts are great.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. Lockouts. I
like that.
Yeah.
I think they're good with, you have to have the right strategy for it to be fruitful. Otherwise, it's just you play all night.
Right. You have to have it. It's programmed more than anything else that I do throughout the year. And I program a lot. So
I will also add to what Loni was saying. You see that culture of the big events, the numbers game a lot with really well-intentioned people will call me looking for a youth pastor. Do you know anyone you recommend? We're just looking for someone to really make fun environments for our students.
Right.
And as soon as I hear that, I'm like, you don't get it.
Right.
And maybe it's not their job to get it, but that's not what students are looking for anymore.
Yeah.
Well,
and I think that shocks people.
I mean, they don't want to like sit in the basement and be bored and like they're not asking.
They just want depth.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was about to say, for the overwhelming majority of the people who watch and listen to us are good, well-intentioned church people who are likely to sit on SPRs and hiring boards within churches who are looking for that next youth pastor or director, and who probably were formed in a different season, right? In a different time. Unpack for us what it is that is most deeply feeding the souls of your students, what is most deeply connecting with them, both in terms of what they want, but also what is formative for them in this time, right? We've named last week's authenticity, right? It's just a prerequisite, right? You can't come at me with a fake version of yourself without just turning off before we
Teenagers see through that more than any other generation.
Oh, yeah. Their BS meters are the strongest in the world.
What is forming, right? What is helping shape, as those of us who are, maybe we are having youth ministry that's thriving, or maybe that's still a place that's in the midst of a regrowth phase coming out of COVID. If we're going to invest time, energy, effort, resources, and our hearts in this thing, what's your recommendation to us, right? So that we're not the person on the phone call who just radically misses the point and, we're having the good old Southern lady, oh, bless your heart, moment over the phone.
Well, like Chelsea said, it's got to be deep. It doesn't have to be academic. In fact, it probably shouldn't be academic. They don't need to pull out their, systematic theology textbooks. That's not what they're looking for.
Strong's Concordance.
Yeah. All of those things. They don't need any of that. But they do want to know, what does the Bible actually say? As opposed to, what are you telling me that it says?
Okay.
Or what are other people telling me that it says? And how does that apply to anything that is happening in my existence or anything that's happening in my friend's existence? So why do I care?
Yeah.
And they want to have the space to unpack that with each other and to really dig deep and to figure out, does this affect my life? Is this who I want to be? Is this Jesus thing something I'm going to buy into? Or is it something I'm just doing because that's what my family has done since Jesus was a small boy and John Wesley was, sending out circuit riders? Or is it something I'm going to buy into and this is really who I'm going to be and it's going to be a formational part of who I am? This is the moment.
Yeah.
So
what does it actually say?
What does it actually say?
And does it pass the so what test?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Bible study for the sake of knowing the Bible is not necessarily the first thing.
It's
or the last thing. Yeah.
Right. They don't want to memorize verses, but
when you add in that this is, you can't talk about Gen Z without bringing up the social media generation of anything you choose not to answer or to avoid because maybe it feels too heavy, too deep,
too personal.
They're just going to Google it. They're going to look it up. I mean,
there's a YouTube video answering whatever you decided you weren't going to say during youth group.
Okay.
I mean, our middle school pastors, a big portion of their ministry is getting sent TikToks with really poor theology that are scaring kids, or if you have kids who love God, but somehow end up on evangelical TikTok and now are wondering, this faith feels really hateful. Is this really what we believe and what we stand by? And so I agree with Loni. It's you don't need your systematic theology textbook, but at the same time, it's as a youth pastor, you have to be trained to be able to share these concepts with a 12-year-old and with an 18-year-old and have that flexibility to know that range, because then at the same time, a parent might call you who is wait, you told my kid that them not making the team wasn't it's all God's plan and going on and on about predestination or whatever it might be. And so you have to have that flexibility in youth ministry to take theological concepts and ideas and translate them
to a
real variety of people.
Yeah. A phenomenal amount of our job, I think, is translating English to English. Whether that's translating adult English and teenage English to one another or translating Christianese to a generation who has zero investment and involvement in Christianese. All of those things that the bless your heart and all of those things, they don't do anymore.
Yeah.
And so their only input outside of us is coming from TikTok or Instagram or wherever they are, or their local schools and Campus Crusade and Young Life and Fellowship of Christian Athletes and all of those things. There are voices that are telling them what Christians believe and who Christians are. And so if our youth groups aren't giving them a chance to really dive in and figure out what is it that we believe is Methodist,
Right.
What is it that we believe as our congregation, and why do we believe this thing? As opposed to, because the Bible told me so.
Right.
Which is great and delightful, but there's more to that, and we all know that in our hearts. And so what does that look like?
That's part of being Wesleyan, right? Is acknowledging that there's more of that to that. And I think it's interesting, you guys we have to name our own unique identity in the midst of this, right? And we're kind of in an inflection point denominationally, right?
Yeah.
As to who we are going to be in our relationship to each other, right? And to all of God's children within our churches, right? And how do we live and name the reality that all are called and called beloved, right? And how do we help our young people navigate that? Because largely speaking, right, we don't represent whatever the stereotype is that gets stated
we do not.
On the internet somewhere, right?
Sometimes we don't represent the stereotype of whatever people think Methodists are. So
Right. Fair. And so how much of y'all's work, I mean, you said it was a lot, right, is that identity forming, right, and naming in ways that are translated English to English, right, to our young people, this is who we are.
Yeah.
Not as a sales pitch, but as just a naming, proclaiming of identity. And, based on the Gen Z folks who I'm engaged with on an ongoing basis, that default Wesleyan identity that cares deeply about issues of justice and character and seeing all of God's people, that is concerned about our personal relationship with God, but also how that influences what it means to be human with other humans, there's a real powerful opportunity here.
Absolutely. And that's amplified with Gen Alpha that's coming along right behind them, right? Like they are that, but on steroids. The world is not ready. Prepare your hearts and souls now.
The church is not ready.
Yeah. I'm ready. I'm so excited, but the church is not ready. I think, so I didn't grow up Methodist.
Okay.
And that was not something that I found until I was almost 30.
Okay.
And one of the things that I adopted early on and learned early on was the Wesleyan quadrilateral.
Oh, yeah.
So let's go super
Geometry
nerdy.
and Jesus. Let's do this.
Super nerdy here. But I think youth ministry is a time where the quadrilateral comes into key more than any other phase in life. And so kids are using their reason and experience and tradition and scripture all at the same time. And Gen Z is all about all four of those things.
Okay.
And figuring out, how does that inform who I am as a person, who I am as a Christian, who I am as a citizen of the world, and what does that look like? And so making sure that they have all four of those pieces is crucial.
Well, and naming, I mean, because we exist, we all live in North Texas, right?
Yeah.
And to the extent that if there is still a buckle of the Bible Belt, we're in the middle of it, right? And that understanding of Scripture as more than something to be bludgeoning people with, right? More, Jamie Clark Souls at Perkins is known to say, in order to use Scripture as a weapon, you must close it first, right? And that's a powerful reminder in the quadrilateral. I like to use quartet language, right? Because I'm a musician at heart, and so that Scripture as the melody and everything else kind of working to make beautiful music with it is a image that just is meaningful to me. But that is so powerful. And you named authenticity as a value of our young people, right? I think no matter what tradition we come from, we read Scripture through the lens of the Wesleyan quadrilateral, whether we're willing to name it or not.
Right.
It feels like it's the most authentic way of reading Scripture, because even if you're coming from a tradition that says I'm only reading it from it literally says it, therefore I literally believe it, and that settles it, right?
Then you're reading it from that lens that you
are. And when you read it, you're reading it with tradition in your head. It's grandma telling you that's what that means. Or it's a pastor at some point in your life telling you that's what that means. Right. And so
becoming Methodist and figuring out that there were actual words and concepts for this thing that I had always known to be true was like revolutionary.
So you named that we're not ready for Gen Alpha. That's coming next. As y'all look 10 years in the future, right? We've got this gift that's inherent within this personal and social holiness, that's inherent within the way we encounter Scripture, that's inherent within this identity that is embodied at the table, right? Where all are welcome and all belong. How does that shape and form ministry going forward? And what do you see as you look 5-10 years from now?
I think one of the big things the church needs to realize is statistically, right? let's bring in that sociology degree that I love and brag about all the time in my undergrad. Statistically, this is the first generation in history that does not automatically trust the church. They do not automatically trust the church. And so there's a few layers to that. The first is, and again, this one is very difficult with where the church is at financially as an institution, is if we keep swapping out youth pastors every 18 months, the average youth pastor lasts 18 months, we're going to lose. And so we do need to lean on the connectional nature of the church, because if we can't all afford to pay youth pastors a living wage, because we're struggling to pay senior pastors that at this point, how are we going to care for these two generations? And then the third, or I guess third, I think ties into things like the quadrilateral. I think it ties into explaining what prevenient grace is, because that answers a whole lot of their questions. And then it is also, I think the church needs to be ready for they want more answers. Some of the people I supervise are Gen Z now. At this point, I have young Gen Z pastors. And I think it would blow a lot of people in leadership's mind throughout the church, big C, that you can't just tell them the decision you made and why. They're not just going to get behind it. There is not loyalty, right? I'm at a large UMC church, so is Loni. When people are looking for jobs, they don't care. They just don't care. And so a lot of the things we used to lean on where people will just follow the senior pastor, or people want to work at the churches with good websites or good Instagram, like they don't care. What they care about is your leadership, is it true to who you are? Is it actually genuine, or is it a sham?
Yeah.
And so I also think that'll be interesting for the next kind of generation of DSs as they are following up with concerns at maybe behavior of clergy, because there are clergy who are reinstated all the time, who go on probation all the time, so on and so forth. Things that I don't know about. I admit it. I don't know all the details. I don't want to be in that room anyway. Gen Z will probably not be okay with that.
Yeah.
And I don't know how people are going to handle that.
Yeah. And where Gen Z will just put up walls against that. And so you've lost your influence if they've seen that you're not there.
Yeah.
Gen Alpha will walk out the door.
Okay.
Gen Z might roll their eyes and do their own thing behind your back because you're not the influence that you say that you should be. And Gen Alpha will get up and walk out. And so we have to figure out a way to hold ourselves accountable to, if this is who our mission says we are, if this is who our vision says we are, then that has to be who we are as leaders. It has to be who we are from the pulpit. It has to be who we are on committees. That they're going to call us into a place of authenticity in a way the church hasn't seen in a really long time. And it's not going to be fun for those of us who have gotten very comfortable letting other people do things in the church, or making our voices heard, or making our checkbooks heard. They're not going to stand for that.
They don't care if someone's a big donor.
No.
They don't care.
Yeah. If the job needs to get done and you're not doing it, then you've lost your voice in there.
Yeah, there needs to be radical alignment. I was listening to a podcast recently where they were talking about presidential politics of some form or fashion, and the tension that leadership found themselves in between values and interests, right?
Absolutely.
Where's what are our values and where are our interests? And what I hear you saying is that Gen Alpha says there needs to be alignment completely with those. There's no willingness to have the conversation to say, I understand what our values are, but our interests in this moment dictate this kind of decision or conversation.
And all of that contextually, like right now, the Gen Alpha is still all very concrete thinkers, right? They're very young.
They're emerging. Yeah.
At the latest, the graphics will say that maybe they're 13. So maybe our kids who were 7th and 8th graders are Gen Alpha. So they're very concrete thinkers now. So that might shift. We might see some as they become abstract thinkers and realize the world is not as black and white as it is in their 12-year-old brains. That there may be some shift in that. But
my daughter is 12. I'm chuckling right now.
But I kind of hope not.
Yeah.
Because it's making us be better.
Yeah.
And calling us to a place that I think is really healthy and good, even if it's hard. Hard doesn't mean bad. It just means hard.
Yeah.
And the church could use a little hard that wasn't self-inflicted.
Sure.
Does that make
Sure.
sense? Like we make enough of problems for ourselves.
Yeah.
What if the problems that we're creating with ourselves were solved by just being who we said we wanted to be?
Especially because a lot of the problems in the church, if we care for Gen Z and Gen Alpha, will actually be solved by them.
Yes.
They're not going to be ones we have to convince to do justice ministries. We're not going to have to convince them to do charity ministries. Now, are we going to have to convince them maybe in other regards of the church and what it looks to, even so though, I don't think they have to be convinced to go to annual conference. Like, they want a voice and a seat at the table. They just don't think they have to earn it like you did.
Right.
They are ready to be at the table now, and they have something to say, and there are their thoughts. Now, are they still willing to listen to wisdom that has gone before them? They are, with relationship.
Right.
Okay.
It has to be relational. And we talked earlier about like, where is youth ministry going and where has it been?
Yeah.
It was very program oriented before. It's 100% relational now. Even big youth ministries.
It's relational.
It's relational.
Yep.
And so whether you're doing youth ministry with 2 children in your church, 2 students in your church, or 102 students in your church, the relationships are what's keeping them there. They don't care about your dodgeball tournament or your lock-ins or whatever it is. They might enjoy those things.
Sure.
They will have a good time on the occasion that those things may happen, but they're there. They're invested because they have relationships where they are.
And again, statistically, they are the loneliest generation in history. So if you can meet them there, that is where your ministry will shine. And then they're willing to learn when they have those relationships and be open about their doubts and their questions. Because again, 10 years ago when I started in youth ministry, I did not have the depth of theological questioning from a 7th grader that I do now.
Right.
Because they're getting the influences on TikTok. They're getting the influences from camp and from all the different Christian groups at their schools. It's on and on.
Yeah. And whereas millennials and Gen Xers, social media is very connecting. Like Chelsea and I knew each other online for almost a decade before we met in person.
Okay.
It is super isolating for Gen X and for Gen Alpha.
Okay.
They watch social media in a vacuum and they follow people that they've never met and that they will never meet that are
It's not
their
an
influencers.
amplifier of existing connections.
Right.
It actually
I would
takes
say
them
that's
away.
where video games are different, though.
That's true. Yeah, they're finding their connection in online gaming with each other and Discord servers and things that, I don't know, kind of feels very retro. It goes back to those like chat rooms in the early stages of the internet.
Where are those communities as we're continuing to invest? I mean, because I'll be deeply invested in the person we hire, right?
Sure.
But
Hopefully.
yeah, but there's also a limitation, right? For like, my every thought is not in this arena, right?
Yeah.
My thoughts get scattered across the entirety of the church. And how do we cultivate that? What communities do they exist, and how do we help plug people into that?
They 100%
So many.
exist. So Chelsea and I know each other from a professional organization called Women in Youth Ministry
Okay.
that has been around for almost a decade, or I guess a little over a decade now. And it's women of all denominations that are just doing a thing. And so sometimes that's us sitting in chat rooms together talking about finding the right dresses with pockets so that your mic pack has somewhere to go.
Fair. Yeah.
Because we don't have belts and belt loops and things that mic packs can hook to. And sometimes it's programming and digging in, or, oh my gosh, how are you dealing with the kids in your youth group who are coming out as queer or who have eating disorders or whatever, the plethora of problems we have. So that is a resource. So if you're hiring a girl,
Right.
send her our way.
Okay.
We will nurture.
A woman.
Yes. We will nurture.
I did not say
and,
girl. I mean,
that was
let
me.
the record state.
No, that was Loni. That was for Loni.
We will nurture and encourage her in that. But they also exist. Like, I'm a part of a coaching cohort that is with all denominations. Again, we're actually meeting next week. We meet once every other month and process how to do youth ministry, how to do it better, how it's going in our context. I am in a situation of state of life right now where my ministry is going really well and I'm at a church where I feel really supported and encouraged and nourished. And what I have become more and more aware of is that means that I need to be pouring into those environments. I still need to be invested in them. Sometimes I think we get to a place where things feel healthy and good, and so we stop investing in coaching and teamwork and those kind of things, so that I don't need that right now. I don't want to drain other people's resources, but the wisdom of age, I guess, or experience is learning that just means I'm in a season where I need to be pouring into those and offering solutions and things. So those exist on an interpersonal level. On the internet, there are 1,000,001 networks of youth ministers doing all sorts of things. Almost every curriculum that you could be a part of. Grow has an excellent one. It's called Stuff You Can Use. Is their network of children's ministers and youth ministers. Download Youth Ministry is like crowdsourced stuff you can download. It's kind of like Teachers Pay Teachers, but for youth pastors.
Yeah.
I also think too, utilizing your conference. I mean, because our North Texas has a pretty active youth pastors group that meets monthly. And honestly, I can't go. So I send someone else in my staff just so we're represented and being connectional. I believe Central has that as well. And just utilizing the connection is huge. And then I also, for my team, so that I also would not be the only one investing in them, I went ahead and, again, and this is privilege, right? I paid for them to have coaches through our conference and used our coaching program. And so it's almost an overwhelming amount of resources once you Google it. But, if you're hiring a youth pastor, I would make it part of their job description. Like, you expect them to use some of these resources, whether it is finding a coach. You expect them
to find coaches, or
having
a coach is essential. And we do that on a pastoral level, right? Like you'd have some sort of mentor. And I think when we come into any kind of programming ministry, you expect that person to be like the next higher person up the chain, right? So like, of course the pastor is coaching the youth pastor. Well, like, that's not true.
Yeah.
Like,
no,
right?
That never happens.
It's like, that sounds like a great plan, except that they don't really have the same skill set.
Right.
Nor do they have the time, right? Your family ministries person might be great, but they don't have time to be pouring into your youth minister and children's minister and preschool minister. So how can we equip those people and find people who do their job and do it well, and have experience and can pour into them?
Yeah. And that's what I would say too. I mean, I've seen a lot of people hiring who say, we're happy to bring in someone young and train them, but they don't actually have margin to train them. Training a youth pastor means you're at programming. You're seeing what's happening. Because what happens to a lot of young youth pastors is a parent will call them or call their senior pastor and complain. And the senior pastor always sides with the parent. And sometimes the parent doesn't see what's happening at youth group, or doesn't see, and so many young youth pastors just get burnt out that way because they're alone trying to run this little mini church within their church, and they don't have anyone who has their back or is seeing them and supporting them. And not that I expect a senior pastor to be at every Sunday night with them, but it's rare that they truly have the time to train them.
Yeah. And being a youth pastor is kind of like being a church plant pastor. You're on your own trying to create a congregation of people who may have not ever done this church thing before and don't have any context to how to pour into it, how to invest in it, how to be a part of it.
Yeah.
With then that layer of parents, some who are wonderful and some who can't stand you and believe everything that their child says. When I remember I saw a meme once, and it was, I promise not to believe everything your kid says happen at home if you don't believe everything they say happens at youth group. I just will never forget a parent saying once, and they said nobody said hi to them. And I listened and handled it professionally, but then I went and I actually looked on the cameras, and I see this kid talking with a giant group, having fun playing basketball. And obviously how you interpret your life is still your reality, but I think you put a young pastor in that situation, they just feel defeated.
Yeah. I had a kid in youth group. It's been a while ago, but every week I could not figure this kid out. And mom had been a Methodist preacher's kid and was there all the time and knew contextually that there was probably more. But her kid would come home from youth group and he would either have the best time in the universe or he was never going back. Like there was no in between. Except that like the weeks that he went home and had the best time in the universe were like the weeks that he had gotten hit in the face with a kickball and like cried in the bathroom for 45 minutes. And the weeks that he was like the champion of the dodgeball game and got carried around on someone's shoulders were the weeks that he went home and was like, I'm never coming back. So like 12-year-olds are weird. Like, like they don't make any sense. But mom would call me and be like, like he says he's never coming back. And I would sit there going, I genuinely don't know what you're talking about. Like that kid could not have had a more rock star experience at youth group this week. Right. That might just be like his own emotional baggage is being unpacked there. Or maybe it was that he got confronted with something spiritually that was uncomfortable.
Yep.
In addition to that. And so even though I'm the hero of youth group, that's also going to be a place that makes me evaluate who I am and what I want to be. And I'm not at a place that I want to do that yet.
Just love them and acknowledge their wins.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's the biggest thing. And, you know, when you're a brand new youth pastor, I mean, wins are weird, right? And I think one of the biggest tips I give to new youth pastors is every kid is different. Mm-hmm. Some kids, a win is they want to preach, and it's so exciting. For some kids, the win is, Chelsea, I didn't black out this weekend. Like, nothing happened. I went to the party, but I didn't black out. And, like, you celebrate that.
Yeah.
The win is so different with every kid. And I think when people step out of youth ministry for a time, or maybe they've never been in it, they don't understand that youth ministry wins are very different than what a win looks like for a senior pastor.
It can be easy to think, like the kid who came to youth group after the parties on Friday and Saturday night, that's a failure. Like, oh no, I failed because they
showed up.
But the win is that they showed up.
Yeah.
Or the win is that they weren't hungover this morning like they were a month ago when they came to church after parties.
Or they do.
Or and they do, like, and they're there anyway.
Wow.
Yeah.
I have 10 hungover seniors right now, and they're throwing liquid IVs at each other in my office. How do I handle that? You either can blow up and be like, this is disrespectful, or you're like, well, they're here.
Thanks for being here. Let's figure it out.
Yeah.
I'm going to draw us back to what I heard as a powerful word of hope, in that no matter how much things change, when it's about relationships, we can build effective ministry.
Absolutely.
In relationship with 2 kids or 102 kids. And so as you join us today on Pod Strangely Warm, first I want to thank you. I want to thank y'all for being a part of this amazing conversation and investing within us. And I just want to leave with the challenge. No matter how scary the 12 to 18-year-old in your church is to you, you have the opportunity to be in relationship with them. And you might be one of the people who helps form and shape their life, or just says that all these Jesus people aren't jerks. And that is a powerful opportunity. May we all take this invitation today. May we all invest ourselves in the opportunity to be a part of the hope for the future by just being in relationship with a young person in your life and in your church today. For this episode of Pod Strangely Warmed, I'm Daniel Hawkins. Thank you again for being here today.
Not to traumatize you about your kid who's about to be a teenager.
Right. Yeah.